If you start losing respect for someone, then you don't want to have sex with them. And then you think the issue is we're not having sex when it really stemmed from something before that. And I think, things can just be intertwined, and it's always probably more than one thing anyway.
If you look at your partner and you think, I hate this person, you're not going to be really excited to have sex with them. If there's any issue about custody, my first piece of advice is do not leave the home where your children are residing. Don't give your girlfriend, which we call in the divorce business your paramour. Don't give your paramour an additional card, because it's going to be easily discoverable that you've been having an extramarital affair and spending money on her. And if you do that, in New York, you're subject to a claim of what's called marital waste. So if you gamble or do drugs or have a girlfriend, believe it or not, those are in the same category, your spouse can attempt to recoup about 50 cents on every dollar that you spend on this.
Welcome to Wham Bam Thank You, Pam. I'm your host, Pam Gaslow, writer, former stand-up comedian, and mastermind behind the 50-year plan to success. I also learned the hard way that you don't bring your vibrator to rehab, and wrote a book about it. Here we have bold, unfiltered conversations about sex, relationships, personal lives, and pop culture with a sharp, sexy, and comedic edge. Wham Bam Thank You, Pam is the wildly entertaining, no-holds-barred discussion you didn't know you needed. Welcome to Wham Bam Thank You, Pam. I'm Pam Gaslow. Today, I'm joined by big-time New York City divorce attorney with over 30 years of experience, Larry Greenberg. Larry's the guy to call when Till Death Do Us Part turns into I want full custody on the apartment. He's sharp, funny, strategic, and has probably heard every wild breakup story imaginable. Hi, Larry.
Hi, Pam. Thanks for that really amazing intro.
Of course, you're welcome.
All right.
Okay. So thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited to have you. You're an old friend of mine, and I have total respect for you as a human and as a career attorney. And want to start off with the very obvious and basic first question. What made you want to spend your life ending marriages?
Well, first, before we do that, can I ask you, am I part of the Wham or the Bam?
I think the Wham.
What about the thank you, ma'am? I mean,
that's coming.
Is that coming?
That's like towards the end, don't you know?
Wait, let me cover the picture of my wife and I behind us. I don't want...
She's already going to love this show, really getting off to a great start. What made you want to, practice this kind of law? What attracted you to it? It's so seedy, isn't it?
It can be. I mean, some of the cases are sleazy and seedy and disgusting. Those are the ones that are interesting. And then some of them are more, plain vanilla. People grow apart. They come to me. They have very serious problems. I think I will answer your question, though. What drew me to divorce is that, not to be cliche about it, and say I'm a people person, but I like people. I find people interesting. I think that every person is so different that if I can connect to them on a certain level and help them through a very difficult part of their life, I'll formulate a lasting bond that they'll probably never forget. It's one of those professions where I can help them develop a sort of a bond with them emotionally, but on a professional level, I can kind of be their advocate and try and help them get the best possible result in what may be, their only divorce, right? Most people don't get divorced multiple times. I mean, there are certain repeat offenders, but for the most part, I think that's what got me into the divorce. I really sort of fell into it by chance. I didn't have a job when I got out of law school. And back then I was sort of a lot different. I was a more wild, crazy party kind of guy. So
I knew you when.
I know. Times changed. So my academic record wasn't that great. And so when I got out of law school in 1991, I had some difficulty finding a job, and the first law firm that gave me an offer happened to do divorce law. So it was a combination of falling into it, not having anything else to do, and then learning to like it as I went along. So,
okay. And now do you love it now? Do you love what you do?
There are times I really like it, and there are times that I don't. When I get clients that send me ridiculous emails, or they're overly emotional about things that I don't find to be particularly important. Like I had some wife yesterday complain because her husband didn't give her $7,000 for mulch.
That's a lot of mulch. I don't know what mulch costs.
I don't even know what mulch is. I mean, I'm from New York City. Okay.
It's the stuff that it's like somewhere between dirt and rocks that you put in your front yard.
Right.
It's like a filler for
He
stuff.
was, how dare he not give me the $7,000 I asked for the mulch? So.
I mean, I don't know how, this is a lot.
What a lot to take in.
This is just one example of like pettiness was one of the questions I was going to ask you is what's the most petty thing somebody ever came after? And this is kind of high up on the
mulch
ladder, I think. What?
Well, we can call it the mulch list, just as a representative item. The most petty thing that people fought over. I had a woman that I called Candlesticks many years ago. She fought over her grandmother's candlesticks that she insisted was a gift to her and not a gift to the husband and the wife. The husband contended the candlesticks were a wedding gift to both of them. So he proposed that they each get one candlestick, but I think it was a set. So breaking up sets.
I don't ever want to be with a man who's going to fight over a candlestick. It seems very odd in the first place that any man would care about it unless, just being a dick.
Yeah. Candlestick, dick. Maybe we should move on.
Yeah. Do you ever find people must you're like kind of like a doctor or not exactly, but people must be emailing you all day with nonsense and bullshit like this. You know what I mean? Nonsense, but just all these little things.
Yeah.
And how do you keep the boundary between a client and becoming like a friend or someone who just constantly bothers you? Because I've even had doctors that tell me some of their clients are just, they don't even want, their patients, they don't even want them because they're just absolutely too annoying.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is that some lawyers say that criminal law is like encountering bad people at their best, whereas divorce lawyers say clients are encountering good people at their worst. So my point is sometimes it's hard to decipher whether or not someone is just a generally bad person or they're just a good person going through a very, very bad time in their life.
Right. Because, you're not finding people, they're not coming to you at a high point usually.
No, they're coming to me pretty much at a low point where everything they have is at stake. I mean, their marriage, their children, which is always, if that's in dispute, that's the worst. And then their money and their assets and their homes and their stuff. I hate fighting over stuff. Most of my colleagues, if you're at the end of a settlement and it's coming down to fighting over stuff, it's annoying. I've had clients fighting over a toaster oven. And then, you realize it's not the toaster oven that they're fighting over because when this happened, I've said to them at the settlement conference, look, enough. I will buy you a new, top of the line Longhi toaster oven.
Right. Okay. So what are the top 3 reasons people get divorced? I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess them. I'm going to guess, and you tell me.
You're not going to get them right.
You're going to tell me if I'm right. I'm going to say number 1, money. Number 2, I'm already wrong. Number 2, infidelity.
Wrong.
And number 3, can't agree on the AC temperature.
Have you been speaking to my wife lately?
That would be one of my reasons.
I don't know what 3 reasons people get divorced. I think people get divorced, Pamela, because they no longer have respect for one another. I don't know if that's 1, 2, and 3, but I think that leads to your other 2. Because I think once a spouse just doesn't care anymore about what happens to the other person, I think that's what ultimately leads to infidelity. Because let's be honest, most men and women, when they're in a committed relationship, in order for them to take that step, namely to have sex with someone else, they pretty much have to say, I'm throwing the other person's feelings out the window. And whether that's a function of them thinking, maybe I won't get caught, so I just don't care about their feelings, or maybe I will get caught and they'll be so horribly hurt, I still don't care if that happens. And then, money, I think can add a lot of pressure, but I've always found that people that are in a solid, committed relationship typically will be able to endure at least minor or even moderate pressure financially.
Okay.
So I don't know if I gave you the 3. I gave you 1. It's really...
No, but they were saying they're connected. And yeah, I understand if you start losing respect for someone, then you don't want to have sex with them. And then you think the issue is we're not having sex when it really stemmed from something before that. And I think, things can just be intertwined, and it's always probably more than one thing anyway.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if you look at your partner and you think, I hate this person, you're not going to be really excited to have sex with them.
Correct. Right.
Yeah. Although for a man, on occasion, they can look past that.
Hate fuck is like a thing,
Nah, you know what? Honestly, maybe
not in a marriage.
When I was younger, maybe. But now, if I'm really angry at my wife or she's done something that I think is not nice, that kills me.
Yeah. Well, you're in a healthy relationship, which leads to my next question. I'm going to just, for the sake of this interview, we're going to just say that. You are happily married to a beautiful, lovely woman for many years now.
Yes, she's 5,000 miles away right now. We're getting along extremely well.
It's perfect. Keep her at a distance. So knowing what you know about marriage, divorce, the law, and the statistics, how did you feel when you decided to get married? Or were you like, I'm in the best position to handle this one?
No, my wife thinks that, like, my God, like I would never divorce Larry because he'll leave me with nothing. Ironically,
you wouldn't. You're not that type of person.
No, but ironically, most of my colleagues, divorce lawyers, have prenups the size of encyclopedias. I, as you know, got married at a time during my life where I was trying to pull a lot of different things together at the same time. And, the elephant in the room is that I was trying to get sober. I had a major problem with alcohol. I'm a alcoholic. And so I think I was most scared about the fact that I didn't follow the traditional Alcoholics Anonymous credo, which is
don't get in a relationship for the first 90 days or first year.
Yeah. And if you do,
you're fucked.
Or get a plant. Like that should be your first relationship.
Right.
So
it's like a plant, a pet, and then a person, something like that.
And so when you ask me, what was I experiencing when I first got married and was I scared? I guess I had sort of a double whammy, right? Okay. It's a double wham. It's a wham and a bam.
Wait, I was at your wedding. Wasn't I?
I think so.
Yes.
I don't know with who. I do. Yes. I do.
Yes.
Okay, I digress. We've been digressing quite a bit, but I think the issue was, so I was getting sober and I had met my lovely wife before and she would have nothing to do with me. I mean, her basic response to me when I asked her out on a date was never. And I said, what about what are the chances of a cup of coffee? She said 10,000 to 1 and like Jim Carrey in Dumb and Dumber, I thought, oh, so there's a chance, she didn't find that funny. Anyway, I wasn't really scared. And the fact that I was a divorce lawyer had no effect on me because deep down, I've always been a hopeless romantic. And I did not ask her to sign a prenup, even though I had some things. I had my own law firm and I had accumulated some stuff.
That's interesting to know.
Yeah. So,
I wasn't going to ask you that, but that's really personal.
Foolishly, even though every one of my divorce lawyer colleagues who's been married, without exception, has a prenup, that wasn't even a consideration. And the fact that I was a divorce lawyer, I just thought, that's not for me. That's for my clients. And, because as you know, Pam, I'm sort of a hopeless romantic, even though I'm trapped in a divorce attorney's body. I'm into music and I sing and I'd like to think I'm artistic. And so once I romantically decided that this was the person for me, I jumped in head first.
I love it. And you guys are doing great.
Well, the police have only been called a couple of times.
I was like, no, I'm not giving him a second to say anything. Well, but
no.
Your wife is lovely and you guys are lucky to have each other.
Yeah.
So speaking of
two beautiful kids.
Beautiful. Speaking of prenups, how valid are prenups? Because you hear so many stories of people contesting them and people say they're not effective. What's the story?
Okay. Well, that Pam, is absolutely contrary to well-settled law in New York. New York favors individuals entering into prenups, postnups, separation agreements, and they are favored and most of the time upheld. In fact, the number of times that prenuptial agreements are set aside or canceled by a court of law is extremely rare.
Is that just in New York? Because I'm not going to say names of people I know. I live in Florida, and which is a whole different, world of all, like you hear of all the gold digging young wives and the old husbands die and they're right there contesting the will, contesting the prenup. I'm like, does this happen? Do they ever get away with that?
Sometimes. I mean, look, I can't comment. Now, I'll be a real lawyer. I can't comment about other states' laws because I'm unfamiliar with them. But
Right.
in New York, there are basically two grounds to set aside a prenup. One is if it's unconscionable when it is sought to be enforced. And so that's like a situation where, an hour before the wedding, I present you with an agreement. I say, here, sign this. You don't have a lawyer. And
Right.
it says that if we get divorced, you get no spousal support and you get $100,000. And we're married for 30 years. We have 3 children. You give up your career and I become enormously successful and I'm worth $50 million. That would be an example of unconscionability, meaning it would be shocking to the conscience to enforce that agreement. The second ground in New York to set aside a prenup is if when it was entered into, it was the product of fraud, duress, or overreaching. And that's sort of a fancy way of saying, I tricked you into signing it. I put a gun to your head, literally. Actually, there are cases in New York that say if you threaten to cancel a wedding, that is not duress. But duress is like, I'm going to do something that's so extreme that you will no longer have free will to execute the agreement. And then overreaching is like the first example I gave you in there where you don't have a lawyer. I don't give you any disclosure. I don't tell you what I have, what I'm worth. There's
Right.
no arm's length negotiation. But does it happen? Yeah, it does.
So, okay. That clears it up because I guess there's an exception to every rule kind of thing.
The rule is they're held up.
Yeah. What advice would you give to a good friend who's about to get married?
A good friend who's about to get married. That's a tough one. I would say that if you're going to get married, you have to accept the fact that you're going to have to be a little more mature about your relationship. And when I say mature, you're going to have to realize that there are going to be times that you are not only going to disagree with your spouse, but you are going to maybe argue and you might even have a fight, so to speak, not a physical fight, but an argument. And you might become very angry. Now, there are people that I know that are married. And if you ask them how their relationship is, and they believe this, it's either perfect or it's horrible. And that is not reality in my opinion.
Right.
The reality of two people in marriage is that there are going to be times that it might feel perfect or it might even feel horrible. But more likely than not, it's somewhere in the middle. And as long as you respect the other person and generally it's pleasant and you like the person and there's a lot more enjoyment being with that other person, then I think that is very key to a successful marriage. People who think, they have one bad thing happen. I mean, look, I'm not talking about infidelity. I'm not talking about domestic violence. Those things are, in my book, inexcusable, and those are deal breakers for a marriage. Because in my opinion, I do not believe in a marriage proceeding if there's infidelity.
Okay. Listen, some people get past it. I mean, I've never been married. I don't, it's like nothing that I would think about.
I'll correct that. Some people can. But on a personal level, because I feel it's such a lack of respect, there'd have to be a pretty good reason to come back from that.
Yeah. And I also would never trust the person again, no matter what.
Right.
There would always be the doubt in your back of your mind. And no.
That's a common divorce scenario that I've seen, by the way.
Yeah. How can you be like, oh, I'm never going to do it again. It happened once.
Right.
Bullshit.
I have a case like that right now where the husband was unfaithful to his wife, and the wife had him sign a postnuptial agreement, which basically says if they get divorced, she gets everything. And that is unconscionable, by the way. We're challenging that agreement, and I think I'll be successful. And then what made it even worse is she just abused him for the next 5 years, and it became unbearable. He said to me, look, I tried to come back from this, made a mistake, but she made my life a living hell. And essentially, he ended up filing for divorce. Right.
But on the flip side, what advice would you give a friend who's about to get divorced? Let's say a man or a woman, they've been married, let's say 10 years, they have a prenup and they have 2 kids. What if they came to you, either one, and said, I'm getting divorced? Like, what do I need to do immediately to avoid further disaster, down the road?
Well, I mean, I have a certain...
Get a good attorney, obviously, is the first.
Yeah, I mean, I have a certain style. My style is I try and resolve things collaboratively through negotiation and disclosure initially. But if one side comes to me and their spouse is intent on all out war, just causing harm and scorched earth litigation, then I have an ethical responsibility to defend my client, zealously represent them, and fight back just as hard. I mean, there's a lot of bad people that practice divorce law, and they do a lot of sleazy and disgusting things. And if I detect that that's going on the other side, I'm going to be very aggressive. I'm not going to be sleazy and disgusting, but I'm going to be strategic and intelligent about the way I represent that client. So, but again, a lot of people come to me, Pam, and they say, I'm thinking about getting divorced. Should I start sending money to my uncle? And,
Well, that's what I was thinking. Like, should you empty your account? Like, don't leave the house because that's abandonment,
Well, if there's any issue about custody, my first piece of advice is do not leave the home where your children are residing. Now, that can be uncomfortable because sometimes there's a toxic environment in the home, and a husband or a wife will come to me and they'll say, I want to leave and I don't want to uproot the children. And I always say, from a strategic standpoint, don't do that. Get a lawyer, try and resolve the custody aspects of the case, and then you can separate, because you're going to place yourself in a very compromised position. You walk out without your kids, you may never get them back. And I've seen, wives, mothers do this because their husbands were so abusive and so horrible. And I've unfortunately had to say to them, once you walk out and leave those kids with that person, you are tacitly admitting that they are capable of caring for them, no matter how horrible he is. Now, sometimes they say, well, then I'm taking the children, and that's also messy. But sometimes, regrettably, I have to tell a spouse, especially if they're the victim of domestic violence, to do that. On the financial side, grabbing things and taking things and moving things and transferring things, a lot of that is all going to come out in discovery, which is a part of the case where we exchange financial information and we investigate what's going on. And you're not going to really look good if you're doing those things. But the flip side to that is possession is 9/10 of the law. So if you have that really special set of candlesticks, you may want to grab them because it's more likely you're going to end up with them. Look, I've had cases, Pam. I had this one guy. He had a Frankie Valli record collection. He devoted his whole life to Frankie Valli. And every day that he wouldn't settle his divorce case, his wife would send him a smashed record in an envelope.
My
and
God.
He'd come to my office. This is like a 60-year-old guy. He'd go, oh, Mr. Greenberg, look. And I'd go, Alan, it's a record. Okay, we're going to figure it out. So he made me run to court, and we got a restraining order. The judge said, you are restrained from destroying any more personal property, Mrs. So-and-so. And if you do, there's going to be consequences. So we settle the case, and the guy's waiting in my office, and we're waiting for the Frankie Valli record collection. It comes in a big box. He rips it open, and he goes, Mr. Greenberg, you're not going to believe this. And I go, what? And he goes, the records aren't in the record sleeves. She destroyed every record. And he's weeping. A 60-year-old man. He's crying on my shoulder. I had to be about 40 years old. And I'm like, don't worry. It'll be okay. And then an idea came to me. I'll have the record collection valued based on the sleeves. So we ended up going to the judge, and we hired an expert in vintage records. And the judge assumed that they were in perfect condition. And he ended up with a money judgment against the wife for about $100,000. So, I mean, that was a consolation prize, but he was crying his eyes out about the records.
Oh, that's sad.
People are crazy about things. I mean, I've had fights about pictures of ducks and, you know, my friend was in Vietnam and he painted this picture and he got blown up by a bomb. And, you know, his dying wish was for me to get the duck picture, you know, and the wife was sitting there like, I got the duck.
Oh, it's so crazy. It's so insane. Okay, time for a quick break. This is the part where I ask you to like, subscribe, and share the episode. Also, I wrote a book. It's called Don't Bring Your Vibrator to Rehab. That's not a joke. It's a memoir, raw, funny, and painfully honest. Some people have read it. A few have even finished it. It's short. You'll survive. You can buy it wherever books are sold. And now back to the show. What is the most outrageous divorce case you've ever worked on? Don't obviously say the name, but can you tell us like one crazy short story?
Pam against, no, I'm sorry. It wasn't, no.
It could have been.
They're just.
How close were you to maybe could have been my divorce attorney? I mean,
a couple of times probably.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. My ex was married to a pretty famous woman who wrote a book, and he was married to the woman that wrote the First Wives Club, and she passed away. So I don't have a problem talking about it, but they were getting divorced, and they had a house in the Hamptons. And when he wasn't there, she took a truck, pulled the truck up, emptied the entire house out. And, you know, and he was just like, he's not the type of guy. He didn't even care. He's like, bye, good, you know, good night. Like he's like, he didn't want to fight her.
Right.
And, you know, that speaks volumes for the kind of person he is. And, you know, she's dead.
Yeah, I mean, look, I try and get people when they're fighting about stuff to just kind of
let it go.
You'll get.
It's true. I understand both sides of it. And as you get older, stuff means less and less. It's just, you know.
Yeah. I mean, look, my apartment is filled with guitars and musical instruments, and people collect things and they're meaningful to them. And so, you know, I get it. You know, people become emotionally attached to material possessions, but in the grand scheme of things, most of the courts, by the way, in New York primarily only care about the kids. Once we're able to resolve issues relating to children, the court's not going to care if you want to fight about money and things for years.
Right. So what is like one crazy story that you had experienced?
Oh, here's some good advice. Wait, I wrote down some things.
You have notes on this?
Well, no, I wrote down some things, some advice to people about divorce. Don't make your girlfriend an additional card holder. Not a good idea.
Okay.
So if you have an American Express card, don't give your girlfriend, which we call in the divorce business your paramour. Don't give your paramour an additional card, because it's going to be easily discoverable that you've been having an extramarital affair and spending money on her. And if you do that, in New York, you're subject to a claim of what's called marital waste. So if you gamble or do drugs or have a girlfriend, believe it or not, those are in the same category, your spouse can attempt to recoup about 50 cents on every dollar that you spend on those things. Okay. So
wow.
Don't give your girlfriend an additional card. And generally, it's not a good idea while you're still together and married to be spending money on someone that you're romantically involved with other than your spouse. Don't wire money to Poland. I mean, I say Poland just as an example because I had one guy that worked 50 years. It was fascinating. He was a janitor in an office building, and the guy was very, austere. I mean, he lived a frugal existence. He saved so much money, and he accumulated about $1 million living well beneath his means. And, right before he filed for divorce, he wired the $1 million to a relative in Poland. Pretty easy to figure out through bank records. So court's not going to like that.
Noted.
Yeah. Don't get a spa package right before you file for divorce. Your husband's lawyer will figure out that 35 electrolysis treatments and 10 Botox treatments paid in advance 3 days before you file for divorce was a feeble attempt at a money grab. Okay. Oh, and of course, these shopping spree things are not looked upon kindly. And look, because Pam, ultimately, a lot of these divorce cases, what makes them so hard to predict And this is why when people ask me, why are there so many cases in court? Because you could come to me with the same facts and I could go to 3 different judges and I'm going to get 3 different results. So the reason there's so much fighting in court is due to a lack of consistency and a lack of predictability in the court's determinations. And it's crazy. In my retainer agreements with my clients, I even say I cannot predict a result. Clients will say to me, Larry, you've been doing this for 33 years or 34 years. You can't tell me approximately what's going to happen. And I'll say, I mean, approximately, but it's a wide range of results. So I think that's a big problem. That's why a lot of people have these long 5-year divorce cases where they're in court.
Yeah. What's the longest divorce case you ever worked on?
I've had cases go for like 10 years, 7 years.
Crazy.
6 years.
Get married, they said. It'll be fun.
Yeah. I mean, again, my practice is, for some reason, I get a lot of bad knockdown, drag out cases. And I take over a lot of cases from lawyers that don't know what they're doing.
Right. Well, at least your job's not boring. I have an interesting question. Have you ever had any female clients hit on you?
Yeah.
Yeah. That must be awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's definitely.
I mean, I could see it because it's like they're vulnerable and they're lonely and they're sad and, you're like a kind person that cares. And, I could see.
Yeah. And some of these people are abused. I mean, they're really, I've had some clients come into my office that are like punching bags. Physically, and they're banged up emotionally and physically. And, and then I've had clients that come in and they tell me really bad things about what their spouse is doing to their children. And they involve child protective issues like excessive corporal punishment, inappropriate conduct, and on occasion over the last 32 years, even, sexual abuse.
Yeah.
So, here was an interesting one. So I think I mentioned this to you on the phone the other day. I had a client. He was very interesting. He was a UPS driver. And he told me, I was writing down the facts as I do, I still use a piece of paper and a pen. And he said, look, Mr. Greenberg, I don't think you've never heard this before. And I'm like, yeah, I pretty much heard everything. And I'm writing. And he said, I'm having an affair. And I said, yeah. And he said, I live in a house with my wife and then my mother-in-law and father-in-law. It's a 2-family. They live upstairs. And then I said, okay. And he said, and I'm having an affair with my mother-in-law. And okay. And I wrote that down. And then he said, and also when I was a child, I was abused by an uncle. And I said, okay. Not sure how that relates. And he said, well, also my father-in-law has been hitting on me.
Oh my.
I said, what do you mean? Hitting on you? And he said, well, he's been coming into my room and having anal sex with me. So that one was a mic drop. I was like, wow. Okay. Yeah. All right. That's it.
And the mother-in-law and the father-in-law didn't get it. They both
Here's
didn't
what
know.
happened. The wife found out that the husband was having an affair with her mother. She filed for divorce. And then during the course of the husband and the wife's divorce, it came out through some text messages that the father-in-law was also having sex with the son-in-law. And then the mother-in-law found out and then she filed a divorce against her husband. It was a house of dysfunction, but that was one of the weirdest cases I ever had.
Even you were shocked. You're like, I thought I heard everything.
The guy, though, it was interesting. I got him joint custody. He was a good dad. He was troubled, but he really, I had never heard that before.
Yeah, that's like next level soap opera divorce.
Yeah. I had a case recently where the husband came into my office and he said that he had a hemorrhoid removed and they committed malpractice and he had gotten this big malpractice settlement. And I said, well, I don't understand. And he said they basically broke his tuchus. And I said, what? And he said he had fecal incontinence and that meant he shit himself. And then the wife was trying to get his butt settlement and it was weird. The whole thing was weird.
Oh my God.
And I was sitting there in my office and my associate came in and she's like, no. Like, did that guy that just left tell us that they broke his ass and his wife is trying to get his medical malpractice settlement? I said, yes.
Your job is crazy.
But you should be aware that personal injury awards are not marital property in New York.
I should be aware.
Yeah. So
everybody take note.
I was able to protect his ass settlement.
Okay.
He actually ended up with all of the money. Although every time he came to my office, I was like looking at the chairs he was sitting in, like, hope that's okay.
This is insane. This is totally
insane. And it was very recent. I hope
he's not listening.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think. There's just so many stories, Pam. I don't know.
We don't have all night. Here's another question. What are the biggest red flags people ignore before getting married?
Well, I don't know. Because
don't you think, I mean, they always say any problem you have before you get married is going to be 10 times worse after. Or, you know, people think, oh, this will be better, or they'll change, or let's have a baby, even though we're not getting along, maybe that'll change. Like, what?
That doesn't change it.
That's so scary. Like, things are bad. Let's bring another person into this dynamic.
I had this one case where the husband was obsessed with taking photographs of his wife. But to the point where he was literally walking around the house all day long, going into the bathroom. And he's like, but I just can't stop. I'm so infatuated. She told me that he was really, really unusually obsessed with her, but she never thought that it would evolve into this mental illness of being completely obsessed with taking pictures and being a voyeur, or voyeur. I don't know if I said it right, but I don't know, like, a lot of times the clients come to me and they say, I knew it was wrong on the wedding night, or I knew when I was dating him that he wasn't right for me, but I never see that. I don't know the people
right
before they're in the relationship. So I really can't say, you know, what the signs were. But a lot of times clients say, you know, I saw the signs, but I was at a time in my life where I really wanted to get married. You know, my biological clock was ticking and he was pretty good. I mean, I'm like, you married him and he was pretty good. I mean,
yeah,
this is your life partner.
So many people, my friends that got divorced were like, oh yeah, I knew walking down the aisle. And I know there's tremendous pressure. I knew a guy once and he was engaged. He was my trainer and he hit on me. And I was just like, dude, you're engaged. What are you doing? And he's like, well, I don't really want to get married, but we already put a deposit down for the wedding. And I'm like, do you know what your divorce is going to cost down the road? Get out now. You know, I understand the pressure, but like, you're about to blow up your life. You know, the writing's on the wall, and over $5,000 or $6,000. How many years down the road when you have kids and then you go get an attorney? This is, you know, so much money. It's insane. I have a funny question. Is there a busy time of year for divorce? Like, do you get more clients?
That is a great question.
Wait, do you get more clients after Valentine's Day? Because I always joke about how many couples break up after Valentine's Day. Single people are so bothered by Valentine's Day. And I feel like it's so funny. And especially now with social media, because, you know, oh, you have to wish your spouse a public this, and you have to, everything is all about show and bullshit. And like, what did they do for me? And look at the flowers. And I mean, I've had breakups after Valentine's Day, and it's such a stupid Hallmark holiday, but I guess you learn something about your partner because you do have to make an effort. It's such a fucked up situation, but what do you think of that?
I actually don't necessarily agree with the Valentine's Day cycle. In my practice, here are the cycles. After Christmas, New Year's, huge explosion. And it's like New Year's resolution, it's like, this is it. This year, screw him or screw her. And so business explodes January, February, March. Then I would say there is a little bit of a Valentine's Day kind of spike, but not big. It's pretty steady. January, February, March are pretty much just explosive. Then by March, people are often going on spring break if they have kids, and they're like, all right, I'll schlep through spring break. He's taking me to, you know, Costa Rica. Maybe I'll go zip lining or ride a horse or, you know, water ski or go, you know, bungee jumping or, you know, so they're like, fuck it. And then similarly, May, June, July, kind of quiet. August, kind of quiet. But then, boom, back to school. it's almost like a little mini New Year's, because it's like, get those kids off to school. And as soon as I'm done with all that back to school shit, I'm out of here. Okay. I'm done. Get the notebooks, get the stickies, get the loose leaf binders together, get the pens, and go fuck yourself. After that, it's done. So September's pretty busy. Then October's pretty busy. And then November. And then boom, it falls off.
I got it.
Because now it's Thanksgiving. All right. We got to go see your mother, Aunt Sylvia, whatever. Divorce cycles.
Right. Okay. If you can implement one change in the divorce legal system, let's just say in New York, because that's where you practice, what would it be and why?
One change. Huh. I think it might be good just to avoid costs and the time that these things go on. Maybe have mandatory mediation at the beginning. A lot of times these cases, you go through about 1.5 years of the entire process, and then you have the option of doing mediation, and it's an option. I think it might be better if at the very beginning, everyone's got their lawyers. Everyone kind of sort of knows what's going on. And by the way, you have to make an exception. If you really are in the dark about the financial picture of your marriage, that wouldn't apply. But if everyone kind of knows what there is and what the financial landscape is and the landscape in terms of the kids are, maybe trying to short circuit all the insanity beginning. So that would be a good sort of legislative suggestion on my part. Mandatory mediation at the outset of the case, not at the end.
Right. And we're going to wrap it up in a minute, but what's your favorite part of what you do and what's your least favorite part?
Okay. My least favorite, I think we talked about earlier, we touched on it, is fighting over nonsense, right? There's so many important things that we fight about in court, such as children and what's in their best interests, and especially when they have special needs and things like that. So when people fight over things that are inconsequential, like stuff, or they take a position that is completely unreasonable or make financial demands that have no basis in law or fact, that's annoying. And I feel like it's a waste of my time, because I have to sit there and tell someone, $40,000 a month for clothing is not a reasonable ask. And I'm not going to go into a court and tell a judge who's making $225,000 a year that you need $40,000 a month for clothing. Or like the list goes on and on, Mr. Greenberg, I spend $28,000 a month on handbags. Really? Okay. Well,
just don't.
You might have to cut that down. So those petty things are annoying. And when I get a client, and sometimes I get stuck where I find out a little of the way in that I'm representing that person, it's hard. You have to really relate and like your client. If you don't, it's not going to last. They're going to have to get a new lawyer. What I like about it, I think I touched on earlier, is that if the person is sincere and they're reasonable and they want to do the right thing, but they want to make sure their rights are protected, and they're going through a difficult time and they're having struggles emotionally, it's fulfilling to get them through that difficult time in your life. I mean, look, one of the reasons I think that you and I were able to formulate a friendship that's lasted, and like we could not talk for 10 years and we can pick up where we left off, is because you knew me when I was going through a difficult time, and I've known you at various points in your life when maybe things weren't as rosy as you would have liked them to be. And so when you're able to be kind to someone when they're going through that difficult time, it's fulfilling. And it's probably the only reason I'm still doing it, because I still have moments like that where a client says, Larry, you really, you're a gentleman. You helped me through a tough time, and I'll never forget it. And, I get holiday cards from people that I've helped over the years, and it's great. That's what's fulfilling about being, a divorce lawyer.
Yeah, I love that phrase. That's got to be such a good thing.
I thought this was wow, this was pretty heavy, this whole thing.
I have one more question and then we're going to end. What advice would you give to your children about relationships and marriage? Because I know they're still young, but with today's climate, with everything, like what will you tell them?
You touched on this earlier on one of your statements. You said, we live in a world where everyone is obsessed with what everyone else is doing. right? Especially through social media and people who are advertising, that they're traveling all over the world and that they're doing all these things. And, I would tell them that all that glitters isn't gold, right? The grass isn't always greener. And whether or not you're staying at, the Villa d'Este in Lake Como or you're hiking, in the Appalachian Mountains, it's your relationship with another person and how you feel when you're with them that is really the most important. So I would say don't let material things persuade you. They're important, but, and security is important, but if someone has drive and they're motivated, that's attractive. And, just realize it's very easy to look up, but it's a lot better to appreciate what you have. And look, I've been the victim of that in my life, right? We're living in New York City. We're hanging out in the Hamptons. We see all these very wealthy people. We're hanging out in New York City. We're hanging out in Miami Beach. Don't believe the hype. That's
100%. And I do live in Miami Beach. Yeah. And it's hard, but stay real, stay grounded, down to earth, genuine. And, hopefully you just find someone who loves you and who you respect and that you have a good life with. And you could be happy with someone no matter what you have, no matter what you do. And that ideally, that's, what I would. So.
Yeah. I mean, I listen.
The rest doesn't matter. Like you said, comfort. Everyone wants to be comfortable. Everyone wants to feel safe and everyone wants to be loved. And that's what matters the most.
Yeah. And that's what I'm most proud of about my kids. I think that they are pretty well grounded. I think they know what's important, but it's easy to be enticed.
Of course.
But again, I think that if I can instill that in them, then I've done a good job. And then my work here is done, Pam.
I'm sure you've done a great job. Larry, you're awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. I hope I did okay.
I hope you helped somebody out there who's going through something or thinking about it because there's so much knowledge here, so much information. And I really appreciate you sharing your experience.
I'll put my cape on and I'll go save the world.
And we'll do it again. You write down more of your great stories and we'll have you again.
We touched on only one aspect of,
we don't have, there's so much, 30 plus years. We can't get it all in one show.
I know. I could have told you about how I went to a funeral today and they told me I had to fill the entire grave with dirt. How did that happen? I thought I was a divorce lawyer.
And by the way, you look exactly the same as when I met you. And on that note,
okay.
Thanks, Larry.
Right,
Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.